that cracked every careful wall she'd ever built. If this kind of story moves you, subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very last word. Drop a comment and tell us what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The bread arrived at Dawson's general store on a Tuesday, the same as it always did. Ed Dawson unwrapped the brown paper parcel himself the way he always did, running a thumb along the scored crust to check for quality before setting it on the counter beside the coffee tins and the hard candy jars. 3 loaves. Always 3. Never more, never less. And they were always gone before noon. He never thought much about that fact. Things sold because they were good. Good things came from capable people. Clara Weston was capable. That was the whole of it as far as Ed Dawson was concerned. He did not think about the fact that Clara Weston had not been inside his store in 4 months. That she left the bread on his back step in the gray hours before sunrise and was back in her dugout before the town woke up. He did not think about whether that was a choice or a habit or something closer to a wound. He just stacked the loaves and opened the store at 7 and watched them disappear. Cole Hargrove came in at 9:30, which was unusual. Cole was not a man who came to town on weekdays. He ran Iron Ridge, the largest cattle spread in 3 counties, and his time was accounted for in fence lines and head counts, and the brutal arithmetic of keeping a ranch solvent through a Kansas winter. He had the look of a man who spent most of his hours outdoors, weathered jaw, deep-set eyes, the color of creek water in drought hands that had forgotten what it felt like to be soft. He came in for coffee beans. That was all. He set his list on the counter and waited while Ed Dawson filled the order. The bread was right there. Cole glanced at it the way a man glances at a window he passes every day without ever opening. Automatic. Perfunctory. But something slowed his gaze down. The crust was the color of deep autumn slashed twice across the top in clean parallel lines, risen high and proud, as if the thing inside had somewhere it was trying to go. It was not a fancy loaf. There was no pretension to it. It just looked real, honest in a way that was almost aggressive. "What's that?" he asked. Ed Dawson glanced up. "Bread." Cole gave him a look. "Local baker," Ed said, resuming his scooping. "Clara Weston. Makes 3 loaves every Tuesday and Thursday. They go fast. You want one, it's 10 cents. Cole was not a man who spent 10 cents on a whim. He stood there a moment looking at the loaf, feeling slightly foolish for the sustained attention he was giving it. Then he put a coin on the counter. "Give me one." He tucked it under his arm alongside his coffee and rode home. He did not intend to eat it right away. He had work. He always had work. But when he came in from checking the east pasture at midday, the smell of it hit him from across the kitchen. A warm, yeasty richness that cut straight through the cold air, and the smell of leather and horses that he carried everywhere, like a second skin. He cut a heel off without really deciding to. 1 bite. He stood there with his coat still on his hat, still on, and he went completely still. It was not simply good. Good bread was something you ate because you were hungry, and it was there. This was something else. This had a quality to it he couldn't name with his limited vocabulary for such things. A depth, a patience, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fact that it had come from an oven. It tasted the way he imagined a home might taste if home were a thing a man could eat. It tasted like something made by someone who understood that the difference between surviving and living was worth attending to. He set the slice down, picked it up again, took another bite slower this time. Then he wrapped the loaf carefully back in its paper, walked out the door, swung up onto his horse, and rode 30 miles back to Millhaven. Ed Dawson looked up when the bell above the door rang, and his eyebrows went up slowly when he saw who it was. "Mr. Hargrove, forget something." Cole set the loaf on the counter. He did not explain himself. He was not a man who explained himself. He just said, "That woman, Clara Weston. Where do I find her?" Ed Dawson blinked. "Sir, the bread." Cole's voice was even, patient in the way that certain men are patient not because they have any doubt, but because they have decided the answer is coming, and they are content to wait for it. "Who made it? I want to know." Ed set down his scoop. "Well, She don't really come to town, Mr. Hargrove. She drops the bread on my step before sunup and goes back out. Lives in that old dugout past the edge of town, the one set into the creek bluff east side. The dugout. Cole repeated the word flatly. Yes, sir. Built herself a clay oven in there. Been baking out of it going on 3 years now. Ed paused, something flickering across his face that might have been pity, or might have been respect, or might have been some uneasy mixture of both. She gets along. Cole nodded once, tucked the loaf back under his arm, and left. He stopped at Hattie Burns' place next, because Hattie Burns knew everything about everyone in Millhaven, and had never once been shy about sharing it. She was on her porch when he rode up shelling beans into a tin bowl, and she looked at him the way older women, who have seen everything, look at men who are looking for something they don't quite understand yet. Mr. Hargrove. She set her bowl aside. Now there's a sight. Mrs. Burns. He dismounted, held up the loaf. Clara Weston. You know her. Hattie's expression shifted. I know of her, she said carefully. Can't say she lets many people know her proper. She studied him. What's your business with her? I want to ask her about this bread. Hattie Burns looked at the loaf, looked at Cole. A small, slow smile moved across her face, the smile of a woman who has just seen the first card played in a game that's going to be very interesting before it's over. She's out past the creek road, Hattie said. Follow it east till the road gives out. You'll smell the oven before you see the chimney. Just a little pipe sticking out of the hillside. Her door's set into the bank. She paused. She's not going to be expecting company. She doesn't need to expect it, Cole said. She just needs to answer a question. He tipped his hat and remounted. Hattie Burns watched him ride down the road and picked her bean bowl back up, still smiling. The smoke was thin and gray against the hard blue of the afternoon sky, rising from what looked at first like nothing, a rise in the ground, a slight swelling in the earth where the creek bent east. Then Cole saw the door. Low and square, set right into the bank, framed in weathered timber. A small clay chimney above it, no bigger around than his forearm, breathing that thin ribbon of smoke. He tied his horse to the scrub cedar at the bottom of the rise and walked up. He heard her before he saw her. The sound of something rhythmic and deliberate. A steady working sound. The particular dense slap and fold of dough being handled by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. He stopped at the open doorway. The space inside was small, smaller than he'd expected, though he'd had no particular expectation. The walls were packed earth-smooth and cool-looking even in the warmth thrown off by the clay oven built into the far corner. A low table ran along one wall. Shelves held flour sacks, tins of salt, a few crocks. Everything was arranged with the precision of someone who had learned that in a small space disorder was a luxury you could not afford. She had her back to him. She was slighter than he'd expected, though. Again, he'd had no expectation. Dark brown hair pinned up in a knot that was losing the battle against itself. Several pieces escaped and curling at the back of her neck. Plain calico dress. An apron that had been washed so many times the original color was a matter of archaeology. She was working a large mound of dough on the table, her shoulders moving with the effort, the heels of her hands pressing down and away in a motion as automatic and fluent as breathing. He stood at the threshold for what was probably 5 seconds but felt longer. She turned. She startled a quick full-body thing, her hands coming up reflexively, leaving white prints in the air. Her eyes were gray, clear and steady under the surprise, the kind of eyes that recovered fast. She pressed one flour-dusted hand to her sternum, a gesture of pure involuntary response. "Lord," she said, "you scared me." "I'm sorry." He meant it. He held up the loaf. "I'm looking for Clara Weston." She looked at the loaf. Looked at him. Something guarded moved into her expression, a quick, subtle closing off like shutters pulled half shut. "You found her. My name is Cole Hargrove. I run Iron Ridge east of the county line." He stepped into the doorway, not inside, just into the threshold, because the space was small, and she was already pressed back against the table edge, and he was not a man who made himself larger than necessary in small places. I bought this bread at Dawson's today. Clara wiped her hands on her apron, a habitual nervous motion. All right. I need to ask you something. You rode out here to ask me about bread. Yes? She stared at him. The expression on her face was difficult to read. It was the face of a woman who had a very efficient system for not showing what she was thinking, and the system was working mostly. What do you want to know? He looked at her for a moment. Then he held up the loaf. Who made this? The silence that followed was strange. Not awkward, something else. Clara looked at the bread, looked at him. Something shifted in her face just slightly, and she wasn't sure what it was or what to do with it. I did, she said. Same as always. I know you did. His voice was quiet, not soft. There was nothing soft about Cole Hargrove, but quiet, with a deliberateness to it that made her pay attention. I want to know how. How? She repeated the word carefully. What's in it? She looked at him for a long moment. Flour, water, salt, starter culture. I've been keeping alive for 2 years. She paused. Patience. He nodded slowly. I'd like to commission a standing order, he said. Whatever you can make. I've got 22 men at Iron Ridge. They eat a lot of bread. I'll pay you triple what Dawson does per loaf. Clara's hands went still on her apron. Triple. She made herself breathe normally. She made herself look at him with the same level expression she used for every business transaction she'd conducted in this doorway. Because that was what this was, a transaction. That's a lot of bread, she said. I'd need to know the count each week. I'll give you a count Thursday, pick up Friday. He paused. Does that work? Yes. He nodded, held out his hand. She looked at it for just a moment, the size of it, the calluses, the way it was extended toward her like something entirely ordinary and certain. Then she shook it. His grip was firm, not crushing the grip of a man who had learned the difference between strength and force somewhere along the way. Friday then, he said. Friday? She agreed. He left. Clara stood in the middle of her dugout for a full minute after his footsteps faded. Her hand still warm from his, listening to the sound of his horse moving away down the creek road. Then she went back to her dough. He wants the bread, she told herself, pressing the heels of her palms into the soft mass. That's all. He's a practical man who needs a practical thing, and you make that thing well. She folded the dough, turned it. Triple rate means you can afford a new flour sack this week and still have coin left. That is what matters. She worked the dough harder than she needed to, pushing the strange warmth in her chest back down where it belonged. She was 23 years old. She had been living in this dugout for 4 years. She had outlasted a Kansas winter on her own, built her own oven, established her own accounts, made her own way. She was not a woman who needed a man to make her life larger than it was. She was not a woman who read meaning into a handshake. She shaped the dough into its bowl and covered it with the cloth, and told herself she had imagined the way he'd looked at her hands. She had not imagined it. Joshua. He came back Friday. He was on time, exactly on time, which told her something, because men who were exactly on time were men who had been thinking about the appointment. He had a cloth saddlebag over one shoulder clean, and he counted out the coins for the 12 loaves she'd prepared with a precision that told her he'd worked out the arithmetic beforehand. These look right, he said, turning one loaf over in his hands with a careful attention she wasn't used to. They are right, she said. He looked up. There was the ghost of something at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. I didn't mean they weren't. I know what you meant. He held her gaze for a beat. Then he started loading the loaves into the saddlebag. She stood to the side with her arms crossed the way she always stood when customers came. Contained. Businesslike. You built that oven yourself, he said without looking up from the packing. Yes. Clay and stone. Clay, stone, and a good deal of bad language, she said, and then immediately wished she hadn't, because it was the kind of thing you said to someone you were comfortable with, not a customer. But he made a sound that was definitely a laugh, low and brief, surprised out of him. He glanced at her. How long did it take? 6 weeks, she said, slightly undone by the laugh. The first one cracked. I had to start over. First one always does, he said with the ease of a man who has built things and broken them and built them again. He buckled the saddlebag. Same order next week. If you want, I want. He picked up the bag. Thank you, Miss Weston. Clara, she said before she could stop herself. You can call me Clara. He looked at her. That quiet level look that she was learning was just how he looked at things he was paying attention to. Cole, he said. She nodded. He left. She stood in her doorway and watched him ride until he was just a dark shape against the flat horizon, and then a suggestion, and then nothing, and she told herself she was watching to make sure his horse cleared the shallow crossing without trouble. She was not watching that. The third week, he came on Wednesday, not Friday, Wednesday. She heard the horse on the creek road and felt the particular alertness that had been building in her for 2 weeks move through her like a current. She made herself stay at the table. She made herself keep working. Miss Weston, his voice at the door. Clara, she said without turning around. We settled that. A beat. Clara. Something different in the word the second time. Quieter, like he was trying it on for size. I was in the area. Iron Ridge is 30 miles west. I had business in town. She turned around. He was standing in the doorway, and she could tell by the angle of the afternoon light that he had not come from town. He had come from the west, from the direction of his ranch. She looked at him. He looked back at her, and he had the particular expression of a man who has been caught in a half-truth and is not going to compound the problem by doubling down on it. I wanted to ask if the order was working for you, he said. If the price was fair. The price is more than fair. Good. He didn't leave. He stepped inside just a few steps, just far enough that the door frame was behind him rather than around him. The space immediately felt different. My men won't stop talking about the bread, he said. Tom Briggs, my foreman, he told me this morning it's the best thing that's happened to Iron Ridge since we got the new well. Despite herself, she felt a thread of warmth move through her chest. Tom Briggs has good taste. Tom Briggs is 70 and has eaten trail food for 50 years. His bar is low. He paused. Mine isn't. She looked at him. What does that mean? It means I wouldn't ride 60 miles round trip for bread that wasn't worth it. The silence between them changed. It was not the silence of a transaction. It was something else, something that had more weight to it, more texture. Clara felt it press against her ribs. The door frame is warping, he said, abruptly turning to look at the door. The shift in subject was sudden enough that she blinked. Here at the top, you see that gap? Come winter, the cold air will come straight through. She looked. He was right. She had noticed it and filed it under problems for another time, which was where she filed most problems that required materials she didn't have money for. I'll manage, she said. I can fix it. Mr. Hargrove. Cole. She closed her mouth. I have the lumber, he said. I have the tools. It would take me 2 hours, and it would keep you from freezing in January. He looked at her steadily. Let me fix the door. Clara stood there with the weight of all her careful self-sufficiency pressing down on her, the practiced refusal already formed in her throat. She never accepted help. Help came with expectations. Help came with debts she couldn't calculate. Help came with the slow, suffocating weight of obligation. But he was looking at her the same way he'd looked at the bread the first day, with a simple, direct attention that asked nothing except to be taken seriously. All right, she said. She did not know why she said it. She would think about that for a long time afterward. He came back the next morning with lumber strapped to his saddle and his tools in a leather roll, and he went to work on her door frame with the focused, economical movements of a man who was good at building things and found no need to perform the fact. He did not talk while he worked. Neither did she. She baked. The sound of his plane on the wood and the sound of her dough on the table filled the small space companionably. Two different rhythms finding a kind of accidental harmony. At midday, she put 2 cups of coffee on the crate by the door without saying anything. He picked one up without saying anything. They stood near each other in the cold, bright air outside the dugout and drank. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked. "Getting a place in town?" She considered the question. "No." "Why not?" "Because I built this," she said simply. "The oven, the shelves, the door frame you're fixing." She looked at the hillside, the small chimney, the low, sturdy door. "People in town look at this place and see a hole in the ground. I look at it and see 4 years of work." He was quiet for a moment. "I see that too," he said, "when I look at it." She glanced at him. He was looking at the dugout with the same level attention he gave everything, and she believed him. That was the startling thing. She simply believed him. He finished the door frame as the light was going. When he swung it shut, the fit was solid and true, not a gap anywhere. He turned around. "That should hold," he said. "It will," she agreed. She paused. "Thank you." He looked at her, that quiet, steady look. Clara. Her name in his mouth, just that nothing attached to it. "Yes." He seemed to make a decision. He reached into the pocket of his coat and set 2 silver dollars on her work table. "Next order," he said. "Advance." She looked at the coins. "That's too much for advance." "Consider it a retainer." He picked up his tools. "I'll be back Friday." He left. Clara picked up one of the silver dollars and turned it over in her fingers, its weight cold and real. Outside, the newly fixed door stood perfectly plumb in its frame, solid against the coming dark. She set the coin down. "He keeps coming back," said a voice in her. She usually kept very quiet. "For the bread," said the other one louder, more practiced. For the first time in 4 years, the louder voice did not entirely convince her. He came back Friday as promised, and the Wednesday after, and the Friday after that, and each time he came, he stayed a little longer. He asked about the starter culture, how she'd cultivated it, what she fed it, how she knew when it was ready. He asked with the genuine curiosity of a man who valued the skill behind a thing, not just the thing itself. She answered carefully at first, then more easily, then with a fluency that surprised her. She had never had anyone ask. She had never had anyone want to know. He told her about Iron Ridge. Practical things, the new cattle he'd brought in from Colorado, the fence line they were running along the north pasture, the trouble they'd had with a water table that kept shifting. He did not tell her these things in the way of a man making conversation. He told them in the way of a man who was showing her something real about himself piece by piece. The way you might hand someone your valuables one at a time to see if they were careful with each one. She was careful. She was also terrified. Because she could feel it, the slow, inexorable warming of something she had worked very hard to keep cold. She could feel herself listening for his horse on the creek road. She could feel the particular quality of Tuesday evenings, the edge they had that other evenings didn't because Wednesday was coming. She could feel all of it, and she told herself every day in the firm, clear voice she used for accounting and rationing and the other serious business of staying alive. This is not for you. Men like Cole Hargrove do not end up in dugouts. They end up in big houses with women who have property and position and soft hands. You are his baker. That is the whole and complete truth of what you are to him, and you will not be foolish enough to imagine otherwise. She told herself this every morning. She believed it less every day. It was the 6th week when he arrived on a Monday evening, a day and time that fit no pattern, that belonged to no routine, with nothing in his hands and no stated reason for being there. She looked at him in the doorway. He looked back at her. "I don't have a new order until Thursday," she said. "I know." She waited. He stepped inside and set his hat on the crate by the door. It was an instinctive domestic gesture, the gesture of a man making himself at home, and the sheer casualness of it made her heart do something sharp and undignified. "I need to tell you something," he said. She crossed her arms. It was armor. She knew it was armor. All right. He looked at her for a long moment as if he were deciding on the most honest version of a thing he'd been working out for a while. The first day, he said. When I rode back to Dawson's, I told myself I was going back for information. A business matter. He paused. I stopped at Dawson's. Then I stopped at Hattie Burns. Then I rode out here. He held her gaze. I asked this whole town the same question, Clara. The same one, over and over. She felt something rise in her throat. She kept her voice even. What question? He took a step towards her. Just one. The lantern light moved across his face, and she could see the steadiness in him, the absolute, unhurried certainty of a man who has made up his mind about something important and is not afraid of what comes next. Who made this bread? The words fell into the small, warm space between them and did not fall like a question. They fell like an answer. She did not speak. She could not. She was standing very still with her arms crossed and her heart hammering in her ears and 4 years of careful solitude crumbling quietly around her feet. I didn't keep coming back for the bread, he said. His voice was low, rough with something true. I came back because I had to see the woman who could make something that fine, that whole, out of nothing but packed earth and fire. He stopped an arm's length from her, and she could feel the warmth of him from there, the solid reality of him. I came back because I wanted to know you, Clara, and I do. He paused. And I'm not done. The careful wall she had built around her heart, 4 years of mortar, 4 years of good solid practical sense, did not come down all at once. It just stopped holding. She uncrossed her arms. Her hands dusted with the last of the evening's flour hung at her sides for a moment. Then slowly she reached out and laid one flat against the front of his coat just over his chest. She felt the steady beat of his heart under her palm. He covered her hand with his. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Outside, the Kansas wind moved over the top of the hillside, over the small clay chimney, over the doorframe he had fixed with his own hands. Inside, the lantern burned. She did not sleep well that night. Not because anything had gone wrong, because everything had gone exactly right, and that was somehow more frightening than wrong had ever been. Cole had stayed until the lantern burned low, his hand still covering hers, neither of them rushing the silence between them into something it didn't need to be. When he finally left, he'd picked up his hat from the crate by the door and paused at the threshold, the way a man pauses when he has more to say, and is choosing to let the moment hold it instead. Thursday, he said. Thursday, she agreed, and that was all. The door swung shut behind him, solid and true in its new frame, and Clara stood alone in the cooling air, with her hand still warm from his, listening to the sound of his horse moving away down the creek road until there was nothing left to hear. She told herself she would sleep. She lay down on her cot and pulled the worn quilt up to her chin and stared at the curved earthen ceiling and listened to the wind moving over the hillside above her. She did not sleep. She thought about his hand over hers, the weight of it, the way it had come down with no hesitation, no calculation, just a simple, clean certainty, as if covering her hand were the most natural thing he'd done all day. She thought about his voice saying, "I'm not done," and the way the words had settled in her chest like stones dropped into still water, sending out rings she could still feel hours later. And then she thought about all the reasons it was going to go wrong. Because it would. That was the thing about warmth. It always preceded the cold that followed. She had been warm before. She had been 8 years old and warm in a house with 2 parents who smelled like wood smoke and Sunday supper. And then the fever had come and taken them both in the space of 3 weeks, and the warmth had ended so absolutely it had felt like being buried. She had learned slowly and thoroughly that warmth was something you could not build a life on. You built a life on bread, on a clay oven, on the reliable mathematics of flour and water and salt and the patience to let things rise. You did not build a life on the way a man's eyes moved to your hands and stayed there. She punched her pillow into a different shape and told herself to stop. By Thursday, she had kneaded the feeling down into something manageable. She had 12 loaves ready, and her accounting book open on the crate table, and her face arranged into its normal working expression, calm, competent, slightly reserved. She was Clara Weston Baker. He was Cole Hargrove, customer. This was a transaction. She heard his horse at the usual time. She did not look up when he came in. "Thursday," he said from the doorway. 12 loaves, she said without looking up from the book. "Same count as last week. I've noted the tally here if you want to check it." A beat of silence. "Clara." She looked up. He was watching her with the level, patient expression she was coming to recognize as his version of amusement, not laughter. Nothing so uncomplicated as that. Just a quality of attention that said he was seeing exactly what she was doing and was not going to pretend otherwise. "I'm not here to check the tally," he said. Her pen stayed in her hand. "I know." "Do you—" She set the pen down. "Cole, what happened Monday was real," he said, quietly, with a finality that cut straight through whatever careful language she'd been about to use. "It was real, and I meant it, and I'll keep meaning it on Friday and next week and after that." He came inside and picked up one of the loaves from the rack, turning it over in his hands, the way he always did, his attention briefly genuine and practical, before he set it back and looked at her again. "I'm not a man who says things to hear himself say them." She knew that. That was part of the problem. "I don't know what you expect from this," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, which was something. "I'm a woman who lives in a dugout and bakes bread. You run the largest spread in 3 counties. Those 2 things don't—" "I'm not asking you to be anything other than what you are," he said. "I never did. You don't know what you're asking. I know exactly what I'm asking." He held her gaze. "I'm asking to keep coming here. I'm asking to keep talking to you. I'm asking you to stop looking at me like I'm a problem you need to solve before I notice you're solving it." The corner of his mouth moved. "That's all I'm asking. Right now. That's the whole list." Clara sat with that for a moment. It was such a small list. Such a reasonable, undemanding list. She did not trust it at all. "All right," she said finally. "All right," he repeated, as if that settled something. He helped her wrap the loaves and load them, without being asked, moving around the small space with the easy familiarity of a man who has learned where things are and does not need to be told twice. She noticed that filed it away with all the other small things she was collecting against her will, the way a woman who insists she's not keeping score keeps meticulous score. He left at midday. She watched the door for a full minute after he was gone. Then she went back to work and did not think about him for the rest of the afternoon. She thought about him all afternoon. October came in cold and decisive the way Kansas autumns did, as if the season had places to be and couldn't afford a gradual transition. The wind off the open plain had teeth in it now, and Clara felt it under her dugout door in the early mornings, even through the new frame. Not a draft exactly, just the memory of cold, a reminder of what was coming. Cole noticed. He showed up on a Wednesday. His Wednesday visits had become a fixed thing now, unmarked by either of them, but reliable as clockwork, with a wool blanket rolled up and tied to his saddle. "Your floor gets cold," he said, holding it out. She looked at the blanket. It was good wool, heavy and well woven, nothing like the threadbare things she owned. "Cole, it's not a gift," he said preemptively. "It's a practical matter. Cold floor pulls heat out of the room. Your oven works harder. You use more wood." He paused. "It's an efficiency measure." She looked at him. He looked back at her with a perfectly straight face. She took the blanket. "You are the most stubborn man I have ever met. You haven't met that many men. I've met enough to know." He smiled at that, a real one, broader than she'd seen before, and it rearranged his whole face in a way that did something thoroughly inconvenient to her composure. She turned away to spread the blanket out and made herself breathe normally. "Tom Briggs wants to know if you do pie," he said from behind her. She turned around. "Pie. Apple. He's been on about it for a week. I told him it wasn't my place to ask." "But here you are asking." "Here I am asking. He agreed, unrepentant. She thought about it. I'd need a proper tin, and apples which don't grow out here. I can get apples. Of course you can, she said somewhat helplessly. Is that a yes? That's a possibly, she said. Tell Tom Briggs possibly. Cole nodded, looking satisfied in the way of a man who has learned that possibly from Clara Weston was closer to yes than most people's yes was. He stayed 2 hours that afternoon. They talked about the coming winter, her wood supply which he inspected and deemed insufficient, his offer to have his men bring a cord out from the ranch, her flat refusal, his patient counteroffer to sell it to her at cost, her slightly less flat refusal, and eventually a compromise she didn't entirely remember agreeing to, but found herself having agreed to. That was another thing she was learning about him. He did not argue. He just kept finding the angle where the reasonable thing and the thing he wanted happened to be the same thing. It should have frustrated her more than it did. When he left that evening, he paused at the door the way he'd started doing that brief stop that felt like a sentence with a comma in the middle. Clara. Cole. He looked at her for a moment. Then he reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair back from her temple, his fingers barely grazing her skin, the touch so brief and so careful it was almost not a touch at all. Almost. I'll see you Friday, he said. She nodded, not trusting her voice. He left. She stood at the door and felt the cold air coming in around the edges and told herself that the warmth in her face was from the oven. It was Hattie Burns who said it first. She came out on a Friday morning, which was unusual. Hattie Burns did not make house calls as a rule. She received them picking her way along the creek road in her good coat, with the look of a woman who has appointed herself to an important task. Clara saw her coming and felt a particular preventive weariness settle in. She liked Hattie. She also knew Hattie's visits were never without purpose. Clara, my dear. Hattie came in without knocking, which was the prerogative of women over 60 in small Kansas towns, and settled herself on the stool by the work table as if she lived there. You look well. Thank you, Hattie. Cole Hargrove's horse has been tied outside your dugout a great deal lately, Hattie said, with the smooth directness of a woman who has decided preamble is a waste of everyone's time. Clara kept working. He has a standing order. 3 times a week is a great deal of bread for one man. He has 22 ranch hands. Hattie was quiet for a moment. People are talking, Clara. Clara's hands slowed, just slightly. People can talk. They can, Hattie agreed pleasantly. They will. The question is what they're saying. She paused. Right now they're saying Cole Hargrove has taken a fancy to the dugout girl. Some of them mean it kindly. Some of them, she tilted her head, are wondering what a man like Cole Hargrove wants with a woman like you when there are perfectly respectable women in town who've been making their interest known for years. The words landed with precision. Clara felt them. She kept her face still and her hands moving. Martha Adler, she said. Not a question. Among others. Hattie watched her. I'm not saying this to hurt you, child. I'm saying it because you should know what's being said, so you can decide what to do about it. What would you have me do about it, Hattie? Clara said, and her voice came out quieter than she intended with a raw edge to it that she hadn't meant to expose. Hattie was silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was gentler. I'd have you decide what you want, she said. Not what you think is realistic, not what you think you deserve, what you want. Because that man rides 60 miles round trip twice a week, and it is not for the bread, Clara. I've got eyes. Clara set down the piece of dough she'd been shaping, looked at her hands. Flour and water and years of work in the creases of her knuckles. He said he's not done, she said quietly, almost to herself. Well? Hattie stood up, smoothing her coat. That sounds to me like a man who knows what he wants. She picked up her gloves from the table. The question is whether you're going to let yourself want it back. She paused at the door. Think about it. She left. Clara stared at the dough for a long time. Cole came at noon as expected and found her in a mood he hadn't seen before. Not the careful reserve she used as armor, and not the quiet ease she'd been letting herself relax into over the past weeks. Something in between, something taut. He loaded the bread without comment, reading the silence the way a careful man reads weather. "Hattie Burns came this morning," Clara said. He looked up. "She told me people are talking." She met his eyes. "About you coming here. About what it looks like." He was quiet for a moment. "Does that bother you?" "It bothers me that I don't know what to tell them." Her voice was even, but her hands were gripped together in front of her, and he saw that. "I don't know what this is, Cole. I don't know what to call it. I don't know what you—" She stopped, pressed her lips together, tried again. "What do you want from me?" Plainly. Just say it plain. He set down the loaf he was holding. He turned to face her fully, and there was no evasion in him, no calculation, no performance. Just that direct, clear attention she'd come to trust, even when she didn't want to. "I want to court you," he said. Plainly, that's what I want. I want to court you properly, and I want the town to know I'm doing it, and I want you to stop being surprised every time I come back. He held her gaze. That plain enough? Clara's heart knocked hard against her ribs. "Courting?" she said carefully. That leads somewhere, Cole. That's not just bread orders and Wednesday visits." "I know where it leads," he said. "I'm not confused about that." "You've thought about this." "I've thought about little else for 6 weeks," he said with a frankness that undid her. "I'm a deliberate man, Clara. I don't do things halfway, and I don't change my mind. When I decided this was worth pursuing, I decided it completely. I just needed you to be ready to hear it." She stood there with the weight of it pressing down on her, the terrifying unasked-for gift of being wanted wholly by someone who had seen her wholly. "I'm afraid," she said. It came out before she could stop it, the truest and most stripped-down thing she'd said to him. She saw something shift in his face, soften slightly around the edges. "I know," he said. "I'm not afraid of you," she clarified, needing him to understand. "I'm afraid of—" She gestured at the dugout, at herself, at the enormous inadequacy she felt when she tried to imagine what came next. "I'm afraid of hoping. I'm very bad at hoping, Cole. I've had a lot of practice not doing it." He crossed the space between them in 2 steps. Not reaching for her, just coming close enough that she could feel the solid reality of him in her space, the heat of his presence, the absolute groundedness of him. "Then don't hope," he said quietly. "Just let me come back. That's all you have to do. Just let me keep coming back." She looked up at him, his face weathered and certain and entirely serious inches from hers. "That's too simple," she said. "Most true things are." She breathed. In and out. The smell of bread and cold air and the particular scent of him leather and distance and clean wool that she had somehow memorized without trying. "All right," she said, for the second time, with the same word meaning something entirely different than it had the first time she'd said it. He reached up and cupped the side of her face in his hand. His thumb moved once across her cheekbone, careful as a man handling something he doesn't want to break. Then he stepped back, picked up his saddlebag, and headed for the door. "Tell Hattie Burns," he said, pausing at the threshold, "that she's welcome to tell the quilting circle Cole Hargrove is courting Clara Weston, formally, and that anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to take it up with me." He walked out. Clara stood in the middle of her dugout with his handprint still warm on her face and listened to him right away. Outside, the wind had shifted. It was coming from the south now, unusual for October, and it carried a faint, improbable warmth. She turned back to her work table. There were 4 more loaves to shape before evening. She was smiling. She hadn't noticed when it happened, but it was there, settled into her face as naturally as anything, and she didn't try to put it away. For once, she just let it stay. The thing about small towns was that news moved faster than horses. By Saturday, all of Millhaven knew. By Sunday, it had been discussed, dissected, and filed under the heading of Well, isn't that something by every woman at the Methodist church and every man at the feed store? By Monday, Clara felt it when she made her Tuesday drop at Dawson's. The slight alteration in the way Ed looked at her, the half-second of reassessment, the new quality of attention. She set the loaves on the counter and collected her coin and turned to leave. "Miss Weston," Ed said. She looked back. He had the expression of a man who wants to say something sincere and is not entirely sure how to do it. "He's a good man," he said finally. "Cole Hargrove. Straight as they come." Clara looked at him for a moment. "I know," she said. She meant it all the way down. Cole came Wednesday same as always. But this time, he didn't come alone. He had a man with him, older, narrow-shouldered, with a face like a topographic map of his years. He introduced him at the door. "Tom Briggs, my foreman." Tom Briggs looked at Clara with the evaluating directness of a man who has spent 50 years forming opinions fast and sticking to them. Then he looked past her at the clay oven in the corner of the dugout, and his face did something complicated. "That's the oven," he said, not a question. "That's the oven," Clara confirmed. He walked up to it without asking which she might have objected to from anyone else, and crouched down to look at the firebox, the dome the way the clay had been laid. He ran a hand along the curve of the dome. "You build this yourself," he said. "Yes." He straightened up, looked at Cole, looked at Clara. "She built this herself," he said to Cole, as if that were information that changed something. "I know," Cole said. Tom Briggs turned back to Clara with an expression that had completed its evolution from assessment to conclusion. "Ma'am," he said with a nod that managed to carry the weight of a complete sentence. Clara nodded back. Cole was watching the exchange with the quiet satisfaction of a man who'd predicted exactly how this would go. Clara noticed that too. "Tom wanted to meet you," Cole said. "He's been on at me about the pie." "The apple pie," Clara said. Tom Briggs's face changed again, this time into something almost plaintive. "Ma'am, I have not had a proper apple pie in 11 years. I have been eating tin biscuits cooked by a man named Dutch, who I believe has never seen an actual kitchen. I am asking you, woman to man." He caught himself, "Woman to old man, please." Clara looked at this weathered, solemn, earnest old man, looked at Cole, who was making absolutely no effort to hide his amusement. "I'll need the apples," she said. Tom Briggs looked at Cole. "I'll get the apples," Cole said. Then, Clara said, "I'll make the pie." Tom Briggs said nothing more. He just put his hat back on and walked back to the horses outside with the dignity of a man who has achieved what he came to achieve. Cole looked at Clara. "Thank you," he said. "It's pie," she said. "It's not about the pie," he said, and his voice had the same quiet depth it had when he'd said, "It's not about the bread," and she felt the echo of it move through her like a current. She knew. She was beginning to understand that everything Cole Hargrove said was about something larger than what he was saying, and that learning to hear the larger thing was a skill she was going to spend a long time developing, and that without quite deciding to, she had already decided she wanted to. He brought the apples on Friday. A whole crate of them. Winesap's deep red and firm, more apples than she'd seen in one place in years. He set the crate inside the door and stood back as if waiting for a verdict. She picked one up, pressed her thumb to the skin. Crisp. Perfect. "Where did you get these?" she said. "Traded for them in Abilene." She looked up. Abilene is 60 miles east. 80 from the ranch, he said without any inflection at all. She looked at the apple in her hand, at the crate, at him. "Cole Hargrove," she said slowly. "Did you ride 160 miles round trip to get me apples for a pie?" He held her gaze. "Tom really likes pie." "That is not an answer." The corner of his mouth moved. "I had other business in Abilene." "Did you?" "Some. She looked at him for a long moment, this large, deliberate, entirely unembarrassed man who had ridden 160 miles for apples and was prepared to call it something else until the end of time if she let him. She put the apple down. She crossed the small space between them 3 steps, and for the first time in this whole slow, careful, patient progression, she was the one who closed the distance. She took hold of the front of his coat with both hands, not pulling him, just holding on, and she tipped her face up toward his. "Thank you," she said, quietly, with everything she meant underneath it. His hands came up to cover hers on his coat. Same gesture as the first time, same easy, unhurried certainty. "Clara," he said, and it was all he said, and it was enough. He leaned down and kissed her. Brief and warm, a beginning rather than anything else. And when he drew back, she could feel his breath against her mouth and the steadiness of his hands over hers. "I'll come Wednesday," he said. "I know," she said. She was not afraid when she said it this time. She was not bracing for the cold that followed warmth. She was just certain. Not in the way she was certain about bread, the reliable chemistry of flour and water and fire. Certain in a new way. The kind of certain that lived in the chest rather than the head, that couldn't be measured or proven, that asked her to simply stand in it and let it be real. She let it. Outside, the October wind moved over the hillside. Inside, the oven breathed its steady warmth into the dugout walls. And on the work table beside the crate of winesap apples, the starter culture sat in its clay crock, patient alive, fed daily, and carefully kept waiting, the way all living things wait for the right conditions to rise. The apple pie changed things. Not in any way Clara could have predicted. She'd made it on a Thursday, taking her time with the crust, the way she took her time, with everything methodical, precise. No shortcuts. She'd rendered the lard cold, worked it into the flour with her fingertips until it felt like coarse sand, added the water a spoonful at a time. The wine saps she'd peeled and sliced thin, tossed with brown sugar and cinnamon, and a scrape of nutmeg she'd been saving in a small tin for months without a reason to use it. She had a reason now. Cole brought it out to Iron Ridge on Friday morning, packed carefully in the cloth she'd wrapped it in, and she didn't think about it again until Wednesday when he came back. He walked in with Tom Briggs behind him, which was unusual. Tom stood just inside the door with his hat in both hands and an expression on his face that Clara had never seen on a grown man before, the expression of someone who has experienced something they are not entirely sure they deserved. "Ma'am?" Tom said. "Tom," she said. "Was the pie all right?" Tom Briggs looked at Cole, then back at Clara. "Ma'am," he said again, and this time the word carried a weight that seemed to require no others. Cole was watching her with quiet amusement, his arms crossed, leaning against the doorframe. "He's been talking about it since Friday," he said. "I finally told him to come say it to your face or stop saying it." Tom cleared his throat. "It was the finest thing I have eaten in 30 years, he said with the gravity of a man delivering a legal verdict. "And I want you to know that I told every man at Iron Ridge that when Cole finally decides to do the sensible thing," he shot Cole a sideways look, "we will all be considerably better fed." He put his hat back on. "That's all I came to say." He walked back out. Clara looked at Cole. Cole looked at Clara. "The sensible thing," she repeated. "Tom has opinions," Cole said. "About your personal life." "About everything. He's been my foreman for 18 years. He believes that entitles him." He uncrossed his arms and came inside properly, and the familiar ease of his movement in her small space, the way he'd stopped treating it like a place he was visiting, and started treating it like a place he simply was sent a warm current through her that she no longer tried to suppress. "Don't let him embarrass you." "He didn't embarrass me," she said. And it was true, which surprised her slightly. A month ago, Tom Briggs' implication would have sent her straight behind her armor. Now it just felt like information, like a door left ajar by someone who wanted her to see what was on the other side. Cole picked up the starter crock from the shelf the way he did, sometimes turning it in his hands with the careful interest he gave to things he was learning. "You fed it this morning. Same time every morning." And if you miss a day, it doesn't forgive easily, she said. You have to earn it back. More feedings, more time. It has a memory. He set the crock back, looked at her. Sounds familiar. She held his gaze. Are you comparing yourself to a sourdough starter? I'm comparing you to one, he said. And there was something so precisely right about it, so entirely unembarrassed and accurate, that she laughed a real laugh, sudden and unguarded, the kind that came from somewhere she didn't usually let people near. He looked at her when she laughed the way a man looks at something rare. She made herself stop. That's not a flattering comparison? It wasn't meant to be flattering, he said. It was meant to be true. She turned back to her work because she needed something to do with her hands. You're impossible, she said, but the word had no edge to it. It came out warm, almost fond, and she didn't try to take it back. Clara. His voice changed register slightly. The particular shift she'd learned meant he was about to say something that mattered. She kept her hands in the dough, but turned her head. I want you to come to Iron Ridge, he said. Not to deliver bread, just to see it. She went still. I want you to see what I'm asking you to step into, he said. Before you decide anything, before we go any further, I think you should see it. She searched his face. Why? Because you're a woman who needs to understand a thing fully before she trusts it, he said. And I'd rather you see Iron Ridge with your own eyes than build it in your head from pieces I've told you. He paused. Will you come? The dugout felt very quiet around her, outside the wind, inside the low breath of the oven. When? She said. Saturday. Saturday was 2 days away. She had no orders on Saturday. She had no reason to say no, except the deep habitual caution that had kept her safe and small for 4 years, and she was increasingly aware that safe and small were not the same thing as good. All right, she said. He nodded once the way he nodded when something was settled. I'll come at 8. He left an hour later, and Clara stood at the window, just a gap in the earthen wall covered in oilcloth, and felt the shape of Saturday approaching like weather she couldn't read yet, but knew was coming. He came at 8 exactly. He brought a second horse, a bay mare with a steady eye, and a calm disposition borrowed from his stock for the occasion. And Clara understood, without being told, that he'd thought about this, that he'd considered her and what she'd need, and chosen accordingly. She was not a woman who rode often. He knew that. He'd chosen a horse that would forgive her inexperience without making her feel it. She mounted without help. She wasn't going to be helped onto a horse in front of Cole Hargrove if she could prevent it, and she could prevent it. They rode west. The land opened up around them the way it always did once you left the creek road, behind vast and flat and enormous under a sky that seemed to start at the ground and go up forever. Clara had lived on the edge of this land for 4 years and had rarely gone into it, rarely had reason to. She'd forgotten how big it was, or maybe she'd never quite known. Cole rode beside her and didn't talk much, which she appreciated. He let the land speak for itself. Iron Ridge announced itself gradually. First the fence lines, good ones, tight wire and straight posts, the kind that cost money and care to maintain. Then the cattle visible in the middle distance, a dark mass of them moving slow and certain across the grass. Then the buildings. Clara pulled her horse up without meaning to. It was not what she'd imagined. She didn't know what she'd imagined, something imposing, perhaps, something that declared its own importance. What she saw instead was a working ranch, large but honest, built for function rather than display. A long main house of weathered timber and stone, a barn, several outbuildings, a cookhouse with smoke coming from its chimney. And everywhere the evidence of maintenance, repaired fences, stacked lumber tools put away properly, the 10,000 small attentions that kept a place from falling apart. How many men? She said. 22 full-time, more in spring and fall. And they all eat here. Out of the cookhouse, yes. He paused. Dutch runs the cookhouse. Tom's Dutch. The same. His voice was dry. You understand now why the bread has been so significant to morale. She pressed her lips together against a smile. Take me to the kitchen, she said. He looked at her. The house kitchen. Yes. Something moved through his expression. Surprise, maybe? Or something that had more warmth in it than surprise. He turned his horse toward the house. The kitchen was large. That was the first thing. Larger than her entire dugout. It had a cast-iron range, a good one, substantial and well-maintained, and a long pine work table down the center and windows on the east side that would catch the morning light, and a pantry she could see through the open door that was stocked with basics but had gaps in it, places where a more deliberate hand would put things. She stood in the middle of it. She turned around once, slowly taking it in, the way she took in anything she was assessing, with patience, with full attention, without rushing to a conclusion. Cole stood in the doorway and said nothing. "The range pulls left," she said. "You can tell from the carbon marks on that side of the oven box. Someone's been compensating for it, but not correcting it. Dutch doesn't notice. His standard is functional. I would correct it." She moved to the work table, ran her hand along the surface. Solid pine, well planed, but slightly uneven where the boards had joined. "This table, it's good, but it's not quite level. Bread needs a level surface for shaping, or you lose the form." "I could build a new one," Cole said from the doorway. She looked at him. He looked back at her steadily, not flinching from what the sentence implied. "You're showing me where I'd work," she said. "Yes. You built this table." "Yes." She laid both hands flat on the surface, felt the slight variation under her palms. Thought about what it would mean to work here in this light, with this range, in this space that was 5 times the size of everything she'd known for 4 years. "Cole." Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "This is you're asking me something very large. I know. I need you to say it plainly." She turned to face him. "The way you said the courting. Plain." He came away from this doorframe. He walked into the kitchen and stopped on the other side of the work table from her, and he looked at her across it, the way he'd looked at her across every threshold for 2 months, with that total, unhurried attention that saw her completely. "I'm asking you to marry me," he said. "I'm asking you to come here and be my wife, and run this kitchen, and bake your bread, and let me build you a proper work table that doesn't pull to the left." He paused. "I'm asking you to let me take care of you for the rest of your life. And in return, I will work this land, and I will come home to you every evening, and I will never once take for granted that you chose this." The kitchen was very quiet. Clara's hands were flat on the uneven table. She could feel her own heartbeat in her fingertips. "We've known each other 2 months, she said. "I know what I know," he said. "Cole, I'm not asking for an answer today," he said. "I'm asking you to know the question, to carry it around for a while and see how it fits." His voice was even patient, and underneath the patience was something that was not patience at all, something pulled tight and careful and very much hoping. "Can you do that?" She looked at him across the table, at his large, certain work-worn hands resting on the pine surface, at his face weathered and direct and more readable to her now than it had been in the beginning. "Yes," she said. "I can do that." He nodded. And then, because he was Cole Hargrove and he had made his case and trusted her to carry it, he simply moved back toward the door. "I'll show you the rest of the place," he said. "Dutch is making noon dinner. It'll be instructive." She followed him, her heart still loud in her ears, the questions settling into her chest, like something that had been looking for that specific place to land. Dutch's noon dinner was, in fact, instructive. He was a small, spare man with a permanent squint and an approach to cooking that could be described charitably as determined. The biscuits were edible. The beans were functional. The coffee was strong enough to re-sole a boot. The men ate without complaint, which said more about their hunger and their stoicism than it did about the food. Tom Briggs caught Clara's eye across the long table and communicated a complete paragraph with a single look. She kept her face neutral. After dinner, 3 of the younger men found reasons to drift near the cookhouse doorway while Clara was talking to Cole, and she understood slowly that they were trying to get a look at her, the baker, the woman Cole had been riding to see twice a week, the subject of whatever they'd been hearing. She felt their attention, the way you feel weather coming. One of them, young, freckled, with the earnest face of someone who had not yet learned to be less obvious, finally abandoned subtlety entirely. "Ma'am," he said, appearing at her elbow. "I'm Billy Hatch. I just wanted to say that the bread you sent last week was, well, ma'am, it was the best thing I've eaten since my mother's table." Clara looked at him. He was maybe 19, sincere as rainfall. "Thank you, Billy," she said. "We're all real glad Cole found you," he said, and then apparently realized what he'd said because his face went crimson from the collar up. Cole, standing 2 feet away, looked at the middle distance with an expression of profound neutrality. "I mean," Billy started. "I know what you mean," Clara said. And she smiled at him, the kind of smile that let him off the hook entirely, and watched the relief move through him. Later, riding back east toward the creek road in the long afternoon light, Cole said, "Billy Hatch is a good hand. Terrible at conversation." "He said exactly what he meant," Clara said. "I find that refreshing." Cole was quiet for a moment. "Do you?" "Yes." She looked at the horizon. "Most people don't." He didn't answer that directly. Instead, after a moment, he said, "What did you think of it, the ranch?" She thought about how to answer. "It's a real place," she said finally. It's not a picture of a ranch. It's an actual working thing that needs tending every day." "Yes. I understand that kind of thing," she said. "The daily tending, the way something alive requires consistent attention, or it declines." She paused. "I understand that better than almost anything else." He turned to look at her. "I'm not saying yes," she said quickly. "I know. I'm just saying I understand the nature of the commitment." "Clara." His voice was careful, gentle. "You don't have to keep qualifying it." She closed her mouth, opened it again. "Old habit." "I know." They rode in silence for a while. The land moved past them flat and wide and indifferent. A hawk hung motionless overhead, riding the wind. "Cole," she said. What do you do in the evenings when you're home?" He seemed to consider the question seriously, the way he considered everything. "Read sometimes. Accounts mostly. I sit on the porch if the weather's decent." He paused. "Mostly I'm in bed by 9 because I'm up at 5. "That's very practical." "I'm a very practical man." "You rode 160 miles for apples." "That," he said, "was also practical." She looked at him. He was facing forward, the set of his jaw suggesting he was done discussing the apples. She felt the laugh rise in her chest again, that same sudden, unguarded thing, and this time she let it out, and it went up into the afternoon air, and disappeared into the sky, and she didn't try to take it back. He looked at her when she laughed. Same way as before. Like something rare. She thought about his proposal for 4 days. She turned it over the way she turned dough methodically from every angle, feeling for the places where it was wrong before she committed to any shape. She kneaded it at 3 in the morning when she couldn't sleep. She thought about it while feeding the starter, while stoking the oven, while shaping loaves. And what she found every time from every angle was that it wasn't wrong. That was the thing she couldn't get around. She'd been looking for the flaw. The thing he was hiding, the version of this story where she was the foolish woman who missed the obvious. She'd looked for it honestly and thoroughly, and she couldn't find it. What she found instead was this: Cole Hargrove was exactly who he presented himself to be. A deliberate man who did not say things he didn't mean. A man who had shown up consistently, who had fixed her door frame without being asked, and brought wool for her floor, and ridden 160 miles for apples, without ever once making her feel like she owed him for any of it. A man who had introduced her to his foreman, and brought her to his ranch, and laid his question out as plainly as it could be laid, and then stood back and given her room to think. She was afraid. That hadn't gone away. But she was beginning to understand that fear and wrongness were not the same thing, and she had been confusing them for a very long time. On the 5th day, she did something she had not done in 4 years. She went to town in daylight. She put on her second dress. The better one, dark blue wool, slightly worn at the elbows, but clean and whole, and she pinned her hair with more attention than usual, and she walked the creek road into Millhaven at 9 in the morning. She went to Dawson's first, because habit. Ed Dawson looked up when she came in, and his eyebrows went up in the particular way of a man who is seeing something unusual and is pleased by it. "Clara Weston," he said, in the flesh and in daylight. "Good morning, Ed." She bought salt and a tin of baking powder, then she stood at the counter a moment longer than necessary. "Ed," she said, "Cole Hargrove. In your experience." Ed Dawson set down his pencil. He gave her his full attention, which was its own kind of answer. "In my experience," he said carefully, "Cole Hargrove has done business in this county for 11 years. He pays what he owes, and he does what he says he'll do, and I have never once heard anyone accuse him of being otherwise." He paused. "He's not a demonstrative man, keeps his own counsel, but he's fair." He looked at her steadily. "He's a fair man, Clara." She nodded. She was halfway to the door when Hattie Burns materialized, as Hattie Burns always did from what seemed like thin air. "Clara?" Hattie took one look at her face. "You're deciding." "I've decided," Clara said, and was surprised to hear herself say it because she hadn't known until the word came out that it was true. Hattie Burns looked at her for a long moment. Her eyes, sharp and warm and very old, moved over Clara's face with an attention that felt almost maternal. "Good," she said. "Just that. Good." Clara walked back out into the morning air, and the word sat in her chest simple and solid as a stone, and she found that she believed it. She did not wait for Wednesday. She went on Tuesday evening, saddling the horse she'd been borrowing from the neighbor's boy for errands, and rode west for the first time entirely of her own volition. The light was going amber and long when Iron Ridge came into view, the buildings dark against the western sky. Cole was at the fence near the barn when she rode up. He saw her from a distance and went still watching her come, and she could see even from 50 yards that the stillness had a particular quality. The stillness of a man who is controlling what his face is doing. She dismounted, tied the horse, walked toward him. He didn't move. He waited the way he always waited, patient and absolutely certain that the answer was coming. She stopped in front of him. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. His jaw moved slightly. "Clara." "Yes," she said again, because she wanted it to be unambiguous, wanted there to be no room for him to wonder if she'd meant something smaller. "To your question, the one you asked in your kitchen, the answer is yes." The stillness in him broke. Not dramatically. Nothing about Cole Hargrove was dramatic, but she saw it move through him, saw his shoulders drop a fraction, saw the thing that had been held careful and controlled in his face let itself go. He reached out and took both her hands in his. His grip was firm and warm and completely certain. "Clara Weston," he said. "Cole Hargrove," she said back. He pulled her toward him and wrapped both arms around her, and she pressed her face against his coat and felt the solid, unarguable reality of him around her, his height, his warmth, the steady beat of his heart under her cheek. She had been alone for 4 years. She had built an oven with her own hands and made bread from nothing, and told herself that was enough, and mostly believed it. Standing in the yard of Iron Ridge with Cole Hargrove's arms around her and the Kansas sky going dark gold overhead, she felt the specific quality of that old solitude for what it had actually been. Not strength, not sufficiency, not the proud independence she'd called it. Just lonely. Just a woman alone in the dark, who had learned to sleep with the light out because she'd had no other choice. "I was so lonely," she said into his coat. She hadn't planned to say it. It came out the way true things came out when you were finally somewhere safe enough to say them. His arms tightened around her. "I know," he said. His voice was low, rough. "I know. I was too." She pulled back far enough to look at his face. He let her, his hands moving to her shoulders, holding her steady. His expression was open in a way she'd never quite seen from him before, the careful, controlled surface of him, down something underneath it, visible that was neither strong nor certain, but only real. "We have been two very stubborn, very solitary people," she said. "Yes." The ghost of a smile. We're going to have to get better at this." "We'll practice," he said. She looked at him. "That sounds reasonable." "I am a reasonable man." "You are the most unreasonable man I have ever met," she said. "You bought a whole crate of apples." "For the pie." "Cole." "For the pie, Clara." She laughed again, that sudden, unguarded thing, and his hands tightened on her shoulders, and his own face broke into something full and undefended and entirely new, a smile she hadn't seen before, wide and real, and belonging only to this moment. A few yards away, the barn door opened, and Tom Briggs appeared. He took one look at the two of them standing in the yard. He looked at Clara's face. He looked at Cole's hands on her shoulders. He looked at the quality of the space between them, which was no longer the space of two separate people. He put his hat back on, turned around, and walked back into the barn. But not before Clara saw in the last second, before he turned the expression on his face. She would think about it later, that expression, the way it had moved through him. Not surprise, not amusement, not satisfaction, though it had elements of all three. Something older than any of those things. The expression of a man who has waited a long time to see someone he cares for find what they were looking for. She pressed her face back against Cole's coat. Outside, the wind moved over the flat land, over the fence lines, and the cattle, and the long prairie grass, going amber in the dying light. Inside the circle of his arms, Clara Weston, who had built her life on the reliable permanence of flour and fire, and the daily faithfulness of things that did not leave, felt something she had not felt in a very long time settle into her, like the first warmth of a lit oven in a cold room. The particular unmistakable warmth of having somewhere to be. They were married on a Thursday. Clara had not wanted a production. Cole had not pushed for one. They rode into Millhaven on a clear November morning, found Judge Alderman at his office above the feed store, and stood in front of his cluttered desk while he read the words that made them legal to each other. Tom Briggs stood to Cole's left. Hattie Burns stood to Clara's right, her eyes bright, her mouth pressed together in the particular way of a woman who has decided she will absolutely not cry and is losing the battle. The whole thing took 11 minutes. Afterward, Hattie grabbed Clara's hands in both of hers and held them hard. "You look like yourself," she said. "Only more so." Clara didn't entirely know what that meant, but she believed it was true. Cole shook Tom's hand. Tom shook it back and said nothing, which from Tom Briggs was the equivalent of a speech. They rode back to Iron Ridge as Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove. The name sat strange on Clara, the way a new coat sits slightly stiff, not yet broken in, but fundamentally right in its cut. She tried it out quietly in her own head on the ride back. Clara Hargrove. Turned it over. Mrs. Hargrove. It didn't fit yet, but she thought it would. Cole rode beside her without talking much, his eyes on the land the way they always were, reading the cattle and the fence lines with the automatic attention of a man whose relationship with his land was constant and physical and entirely without romance. He loved Iron Ridge, the way you loved a thing you'd built yourself, not with sentiment, but with the bone-deep investment of someone who had poured years of daily labor into something and watched it become real. She understood that. She understood it better than almost anything. "Cole?" she said as Iron Ridge came into view. "The range, in the kitchen. I want to fix the pull before I start the week's baking." He looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved. "Today? Is there a reason not to?" He looked at the house. Back at her. "It's our wedding day. I'm aware." She held his gaze. "And tomorrow there are 22 men who need bread. The range pulls left. I'd like to correct it before I learn its bad habits instead of fixing them." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'll get the tools." "Thank you," she said. They rode in, and it was not a romantic entrance into a new life. Cole took the horses, Clara went to the kitchen, and they spent the first hour of their marriage adjusting the draft plate on a cast iron range. Cole lay on his back on the kitchen floor and worked the lower damper while Clara tested the heat distribution with her hand above the oven box and told him, "Left, right, hold. Try again." In the calm, precise voice she used for anything that required accuracy. When it was right, she said, "There." He sat up from the floor with a wrench in his hand and looked at her. You're going to make my men very fat, he said. Your men are going to earn every bite, she said. I expect them to carry wood. He stood up. They'll carry wood. And I want a proper flour bin, fitted with a lid that seals. Dutch's bin is open and the mice have been in it. I'll build it this weekend. And the pantry shelves on the east wall need to come down 6 inches. They're too high for practical reach. Clara. She stopped. He was looking at her with an expression that had layers to it. Amusement on the surface, and underneath that, something that was neither amusement nor patience, but something warmer than both. We have time, he said. She felt the edge come off her. She hadn't realized she'd been bracing, holding herself forward into the work, into the practical business of making this kitchen hers, because the work was familiar and the work was safe, and the rest of it was enormous and new and required a kind of surrender she was still learning how to make. Old habit, she said, for the second time in their acquaintance. I know, he said, same as before. He set the wrench on the table and came around to her side and put his hands on her shoulders the way he had in the yard at Iron Ridge, steadying rather than restraining. You don't have to earn your place here, he said quietly. You already have it. You had it before you fixed my range. She looked up at him. I need the flour bin coal. That part is practical. I'll build it Saturday, he said. The pantry shelves too. His hands moved on her shoulders, a slow, settling pressure. But tonight you're going to sit in this kitchen and eat dinner and not fix anything. She considered that. Dutch is cooking tonight. I told him to take the evening. So you're cooking. I'm warming beans, he said. There's a difference. She looked at him. He was entirely serious. She felt the laugh move through her again, softer this time, more settled, less surprised by itself than it had been in the beginning. All right, she said. He warmed the beans. She cut the bread she'd brought from the dugout that morning, the last loaves she'd ever make in that old clay oven, though she hadn't known it when she shaped them, and was glad she hadn't, because she might have made too much of it, and it deserved to be ordinary. They ate at the pine work table in the kitchen, just the two of them in the light of the kitchen lamp, and it was unglamorous and sufficient, and entirely real, and Clara decided that was exactly what she wanted her life to be. Unglamorous, sufficient, real, yay. The adjustment was not simple. She had known it would not be simple. She was not a woman who expected simple, but knowing a thing in the abstract and living it daily were two different countries, and crossing from one to the other required a passport she was still learning how to carry. The ranch house was big. That was the first thing she had to accustom herself to the sheer scale of the space after 4 years in a dugout. Rooms that served no immediate purpose. Hallways. A front parlor that felt like a held breath full of furniture that had been there since before Cole built the place up and hadn't been rearranged since. She found herself standing in the doorway of that parlor on her second morning and feeling the peculiar anxiety of a woman who does not know if she is allowed to move the chairs. She moved them anyway. Cole came in that evening and looked at the rearranged room without comment. I moved the chairs, she said from the kitchen doorway, watching his face. He looked at the room. They needed moving, he said. You don't know that. You didn't know how they were before. They look right now, he said. That's how I know. She let out a slow breath. I'm going to change a lot of things, she said. The way the house runs, the stores, the schedule. Some of it you'll like, and some of it you won't. He came into the kitchen and sat down at the table the way he did when he'd been out all day and wanted to be in the same room as her while she worked. Tell me the ones I won't like, he said. Let's get those out first. She looked at him. I want to take over the accounts for the household supply. Done. I want to renegotiate the contract with Dawson's. He's been charging you 20% over market for dried goods because no one's been watching the numbers. Cole was quiet for a moment. How do you know that? Because I've been buying from Dawson for 4 years, and I know what things cost, and I looked at your last 3 receipts. She paused. I found them in the pantry. I wasn't snooping. I know you weren't snooping, he said. You were assessing. Yes? He was quiet for another moment, and she watched his face carefully, because this was the kind of thing that could go wrong. A man who heard a woman say, "You've been paying too much," and heard it as "You've been foolish." But Cole's face was doing nothing defensive. It was doing what it usually did, which was think. 20% over, he said. At minimum. Possibly more on the sugar. He set his hat on the table. Talk to Dawson, he said. Whatever you work out is fine. She let out another breath. You're not going to argue? About you saving me money, no. He looked at her directly. Clara, this is your house. Those are your accounts to run. I built a ranch. I don't know the first thing about running a household. That's why it's been running badly. She stood at the range with a spoon in her hand and looked at this man she'd married 11 days ago, who was sitting at her table telling her the truth about himself, with the same straightforward ease he brought to everything. Most men don't admit that, she said. Most men's households run badly, he said. She turned back to the pot. After a moment, she said quietly, Thank you, Cole. For what? For not making me fight for it. He was quiet. Then, you shouldn't have to fight for things that are yours. She stirred the pot and did not say anything because there was nothing to say that wouldn't come out insufficient. She just let the words sit in the kitchen with them warm and solid as the range heat at her back. The men adjusted to her presence at their own pace, which she respected. She did not try to ingratiate herself. She cooked and she baked, and she kept the kitchen running with the same precise, competent attention she had given everything in her life. And she let the work speak the way it always had. Billy Hatch was won over already, which required no effort. He appeared at the kitchen door every morning like a retriever who had found its person and was not going to let circumstance separate them. Mrs. Hargrove, he said every morning, with the same earnest sincerity as if he was still faintly surprised by the fact of her and pleased about it every time. Billy, she said every morning, and gave him a task that kept him from underfoot while making him feel useful, because that was clearly what he needed. The harder one was a man named Greer. Greer was 35, dark-haired, with a close manner that kept its own distance. He was competent at his work, Cole had said so, and Cole didn't say things that weren't true. But he had a way of being in the kitchen that made Clara feel the edges of her authority as a new thing, a thing that hadn't been stress-tested yet. It happened on the third week. She was reorganizing the stores when she heard him in the pantry behind her. She didn't think anything of it until she realized he was taking down the cured hams she'd specifically moved to a different hook to allow the smokehouse air to circulate. Greer, she said. He looked at her. His expression was not hostile. It was something more subtle, the expression of a man who has not yet decided if a new authority is legitimate. Those are on that hook for a reason, she said. Please put them back. He looked at the hams, at her. Dutch always kept them on the south wall. Dutch kept the flour bin open and the mice got in it, she said evenly. The hams are on that hook because it gets the draft from the smokehouse window and they'll keep longer. Please put them back. A beat. She did not look away. She had looked away from too many things for too long, and she was done with it. Greer put the hams back. He left without another word. She stood in the pantry for a moment after he was gone, her heart running slightly faster than usual, and made herself breathe through it. Then she finished reorganizing the stores. That evening, she did not mention it to Cole. She did not mention it because she had handled it herself, and she did not need Cole to fight her battles, and she did not want him to, because the moment he fought her battles was the moment the men stopped seeing her as the authority and started seeing her as the woman the boss protected, which were two entirely different things. She had built a clay oven with her own hands. She could establish a kitchen. But 2 days later, Tom Briggs appeared at the kitchen door in the mid-afternoon when the kitchen was empty and Clara was working alone, which was not a time Tom Briggs usually appeared anywhere near the kitchen. He came in and sat on the stool by the work table without being invited, which was Tom's way, and he put his hat on his knee and looked at her for a moment. Greer, he said. She kept her hands in the dough. It's handled, Tom. I know it is, he said. I saw it handled. I'm not here to rehandle it." He paused. "I want you to know that the rest of the men know what happened, and they know how you handled it, and they're going to be different after that." She looked up. "Different how?" "Less uncertain," he said. "About you." He turned his hat in his hands. "They liked you for the bread. That was easy. This is harder, and you did it right, and they know it." He set his hat back on. "That's all I came to say." He left. Clara looked at the door for a moment after it closed. Then she looked at the dough under her hands, the familiar living weight of it soft and yielding and strong all at once. She pressed the heels of her hands in and pushed. 6 weeks into her marriage, a letter came from a woman named Helen Marsh. Ed Dawson delivered it himself, which was unusual, and the particular careful neutrality of his expression when he handed it over told Clara before she opened it that he had some idea of what was in it. She opened it at the kitchen table after he'd gone. Helen Marsh was, it turned out, the daughter of a cattleman named Robert Price, who owned the spread adjacent to Iron Ridge's eastern fence line. The letter was brief, written in a fine copper-plate hand, and it said with considerable courtesy and absolutely no warmth that she had heard of Cole Hargrove's recent marriage and wished to offer her congratulations, and that she hoped Mrs. Hargrove would be amenable to a visit, as it was always a pleasure to welcome new families to the county. Clara read it twice. She had been in enough rooms and had enough years of quiet observation to know the shape of what she was reading. The congratulations were real. The welcome was real. And underneath both of them, very neatly buried but present if you knew where to look, was the curiosity of a woman who had expected something different for herself and was coming to assess what had arrived instead. She asked Cole that evening. She handed him the letter across the dinner table. He read it, set it down. "Helen Price," he said. "Marsh now, apparently. She married. 3 years ago, George Marsh over in Abilene." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "Her father and I have done business. The Price spread shares our east fence." "Cole." She kept her voice even. "Was there something between you and Helen Price?" He looked at her. "No." "Was there something she wanted? A beat, shorter than the last one?" "Possibly," he said. "A long time ago. It was never something I encouraged." Clara looked at the letter on the table between them. "She's coming to look at me," she said. "You understand that?" "I understand that," he said. "She's coming to see what kind of woman you married instead." "Yes." "And you think I should receive her?" "I think," he said carefully, "that the Price spread controls the water rights on the eastern tributary that feeds our south pasture. And I think Helen Marsh, whatever her personal feelings, is a practical woman who will behave with courtesy if she is treated with courtesy." He paused. "I also think you are the woman who negotiated Ed Dawson down 12% last week and reorganized this entire household in 6 weeks and fixed a range that Dutch couldn't figure out in 4 years." He looked at her steadily. "I think you will be fine." She picked up the letter. "I'll write back tomorrow," she said. "Thursday works." He nodded. She looked at him across the table. "Cole, if she says something that needs to be said to her directly, then say it," he said without hesitation. "This is your house. You say what needs saying in it." She folded the letter. All right. She was not, if she was honest, entirely fine about it. Not because she was afraid of Helen Marsh exactly, but because Helen Marsh represented something Clara had pushed down and not examined the question of what the women of this county thought of Cole Hargrove marrying a dugout baker, and whether that opinion was going to be a thing she had to fight or a thing she could simply outlast. She had outlasted the cold in a hillside dugout. She had outlasted 4 Kansas winters with a clay oven and a corn bristle broom. She thought she could outlast this. She thought. Helen Marsh arrived on a Thursday in a good buggy with a good horse dressed in a traveling coat that cost more than Clara's flour supply for a year. She was handsome brown-haired, poised with the particular carriage of a woman who had been told since girlhood that she was worth looking at and had arranged her life accordingly. She was also, Clara discovered within the first 5 minutes, not unintelligent. Clara received her in the front parlor, the rearranged one with the chairs where she'd put them, and brought coffee and the good bread, and sat across from Helen Marsh with her hands in her lap, and her back straight, and waited. Helen looked around the parlor. "You've made changes," she said. "Some," Clara said. "It feels different." She paused. "Better. It always felt like nobody lived here before." Clara looked at her. The sentence was genuine, she decided. Not a strategy. It was a working ranch house, Clara said. Cole put everything into the land. There wasn't much left for the house. "He's a good rancher," Helen said. She picked up her coffee cup. "He's a very single-minded man. When he decides something, that's the whole of it." She looked at Clara over the rim of the cup. "He decided you." "Yes," Clara said simply. Helen set the cup down. She looked at Clara for a long moment, with an expression that Clara, watching carefully, read as something she had not expected, not resentment, not condescension. Something closer to evaluation. The genuine, unperformed assessment of a woman who respects capability and is deciding whether she's looking at it. "How long have you been baking?" Helen said. 8 years. "And the bread Cole's men won't stop talking about." "I can send you a loaf," Clara said, "if you'd like to judge for yourself." Helen's mouth curved. Not a performance, a real thing. "I would like that," she said. Clara looked at this woman across her parlor table. This woman who had expected something for herself, that had not come, who had married somewhere else, and made her life, and come here today anyway, out of some combination of pride and curiosity, and genuine courtesy, and felt the confrontation she'd been bracing for simply failed to materialize. "Helen," she said, "I want us to be plain with each other. I think that serves everyone better." Helen looked at her. "All right. This is my house," Clara said. "I didn't come to it the way you might have expected someone to come to it. I came from a dugout on the creek road, and I baked bread to survive, and Cole found me there, and that is the whole of it. I'm not going to pretend to be something I'm not, and I'm not going to feel diminished by what I was, because what I was kept me alive 4 years on my own." She paused. "But I also have no interest in being your enemy, and I don't think you have any interest in being mine." Helen Marsh was quiet for a moment. "No," she said finally. "I don't." She looked at her hands. "George is a good man. I have a good life." She looked back up. "I came because I was curious, and because the Eastern Tributary easement is due for renewal in the spring, and I want to know the woman I'm negotiating with." Clara felt it, the clean, clarifying snap of one capable woman recognizing another. "Then come back in spring," Clara said, "and bring your numbers." Helen's smile this time was wide and unguarded, and entirely different from anything that had come before it. "I'll do that," she said. She stayed another hour. They talked about water rights and flower prices and the particular challenges of managing large households in Kansas winters, and by the time Helen's buggy rolled back down the Iron Ridge Road, Clara felt something she hadn't expected to feel. She felt like herself, fully, without apology or diminishment, or the exhausting work of making herself smaller to fit a space that had been built for someone else. She was Clara Hargrove. She had fixed a range and renegotiated a contract and stood in her own parlor and told a formidable woman the truth and been met with respect. She went back to the kitchen. She had bread to shape. Cole came in at dusk, stamping mud from his boots, and looked at her face with the particular reading attention he always gave her when he'd been away and was catching up. "Helen Marsh," he said. "She's coming back in spring about the easement." He stopped. "How did that happen?" "We talked," Clara said. He looked at her for a moment. "Are you all right?" She turned from the range. "Cole, I'm more than all right." She held his gaze. "I think I'm starting to understand what I'm doing here." He came to the table and sat down, his coat still on, his eyes on her face. "Tell me." "I thought this was your ranch, and I was living in it," she said. "I kept waiting for the moment it would feel like mine too." She set the spoon down. "Today it did. Not because of the house or the kitchen or the contracts, Because I sat across from a woman who came here to measure me, and I didn't move an inch. She looked at him. That's when it became mine. Cole sat with that for a moment. His expression was quiet, and she'd been married to him long enough now to read what lived behind the quiet. It was always yours, he said. I know that now, she said. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Same gesture as the first time. Same weight, same certainty. But different now, not a beginning, not a question, not permission being offered and carefully considered. Just two people who had chosen each other in a kitchen that smelled of bread at the end of an ordinary day. Clara turned her hand over under his and held on. Outside, the Kansas wind moved over Iron Ridge, over the fence lines and the cattle and the dark flat land running to the horizon in every direction. Inside, the range burned steady and true. She had fixed that too. The blizzard came on a Wednesday. It came the way the worst Kansas storms always came, without sufficient warning, moving fast out of the northwest, the temperature dropping 15 degrees in the space of an hour. By noon, the sky had gone the color of old iron. By 2 in the afternoon, the first snow was horizontal, driving hard against every window of the Iron Ridge ranch house, and Cole was still out on the north pasture with 3 men trying to move 200 head of cattle to the shelter of the low ground before the full weight of it hit. Clara heard the wind change and went to the window and looked out and made a decision in about 4 seconds. She turned to Billy Hatch, who had been in the kitchen helping her carry flour sacks from the pantry, and was now standing at the window beside her with his face gone pale at what he saw. "Billy," she said, "how much wood is stacked on the covered porch?" He pulled himself back from the window. "Maybe 2 days' worth, Mrs. Hargrove. Go get Dutch and whoever else is in the bunkhouse and bring everything from the woodpile into the porch and the mudroom, all of it, right now before the wind gets worse." "Yes, ma'am." He was already moving. "Then come back here." He went. Clara went to the pantry and started taking stock with the fast, precise attention of a woman who had survived alone on a Kansas plain and knew exactly what it meant when the weather turned against you. She had enough flour. She had enough lard. She had dried beans and salt pork and coffee and 3 kinds of preserved vegetables, and she ran her hand along the shelf enough sugar to keep 22 men in hot coffee and something sweet for 4 days minimum. She could work with 4 days. She pulled out her largest bread bowls. Dutch appeared in the kitchen doorway 20 minutes later, stamping snow off his boots, his face wind-burned and alarmed. He took one look at the bowls on the work table. The flour already measured the range, stoked up to full heat. "Storm's going to run 2 days at least," he said. "I know," she said. "Can you do the beans?" He blinked. In 4 years of running the Iron Ridge cookhouse, no one had ever asked Dutch if he could do the beans, as if there was any other option. "Yes, ma'am." "Start them now. Low and slow. I'll need the range for bread, but I can give you 1 burner." She was already mixing her hands, moving with the automatic fluency of someone for whom this was as natural as breathing. "Billy is bringing in the wood. Where's Greer?" "Checking the hen house." "Good. Tell him when he's back I need him here." She looked up. "The men are going to be cold and exhausted when they come in. They're going to need to eat immediately and keep eating. That's what we're doing." Dutch looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man recalibrating. He had been running this cookhouse on stoicism and low expectations for 4 years. He was being shown in real time what it looked like when someone actually ran it. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and went to the bean pot without another word. Clara mixed the first batch of dough and felt something clarify in her, the particular crystalline focus that came when a problem was large and the solution was physical and entirely within her competence. She had been afraid of so many things in the past year. She had been afraid of Cole's proposal, and his kitchen, and his ranch, and his men and Helen Marsh, and the size of the life she'd stepped into. She was not afraid of this. She knew how to feed people in a storm. She had done it for herself for 4 years. Now she had a kitchen 5 times the size and 22 men instead of 1, and all it required was scale. She scaled. Cole came in at 4 in the afternoon, which was earlier than she'd expected, and the sight of him in the kitchen doorway, snow-covered, half-frozen, moving with the careful stiffness of a man whose body temperature had dropped past the point of comfort, made something lurch in her chest that was not the detached concern of a rancher's wife for a rancher, but something much more personal and much less manageable. She crossed the kitchen in 6 steps and put both hands on his face. He was cold, his jaw, his cheekbones, the back of his neck, when she reached up to check all of it cold in the deep, alarming way of someone who had been outside too long. "Cole?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm all right." His voice was slightly thickened by the cold. "We got them down, all of them." He caught her hands on his face and held them there, pressing them against his skin. "Your hands are warm." "Come to the range," she said. "In a minute. I need to know the men. Tom is bringing them. Billy has the hot coffee on." She didn't let go of his hands. "Come to the range, Cole." He let her lead him, which told her more about how cold he was than anything else, because Cole Hargrove did not get led anywhere. She put him in the chair closest to the range and put a mug of coffee between his hands and stood in front of him with her arms crossed, watching the color come back into his face. And she was aware that this was the first time since their marriage that something had genuinely frightened her. Not for herself, but for him. And the awareness of it sat in her chest like a coal, small, hot, impossible to ignore. "You should have come in sooner," she said. "I had 200 head. I know what you had." She kept her voice even. "And now you have them. And you're going to sit there until you're warm." He looked at her over the rim of the mug. His color was coming back. "You're giving me orders." "Yes." "In my kitchen." "My kitchen," she said. "We established that." He held her gaze for a moment. Then something that had been tight in his face let go, and he leaned back in the chair and wrapped both hands around the mug and closed his eyes. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She stood there and watched him breathe and felt the fear in her chest slowly, slowly ease. The storm ran 2 days and 7 hours. Clara baked for most of it. Not continuously, she slept in shifts, 4 hours at a time, handing the kitchen to Dutch with specific instructions and waking up to check that they'd been followed. But the rhythm of the baking was constant, loaf after loaf coming out of the range and being cut and eaten by men who came in from the cold, in rotations, checking the cattle, maintaining the buildings, doing the 100 small essential tasks that kept a ranch alive in a blizzard. The kitchen became the center of everything. Men came in to warm their hands and drink coffee and eat bread still hot from the oven. And they came back more than they needed to. Clara noticed, not just for the food, but for the kitchen itself. The heat, the smell, the particular quality of a space that was being actively, competently maintained in the middle of chaos. She noticed something else too. Something she hadn't expected. They talked to her. Not the way they'd talk to Dutch, brusquely, transactionally, requests and responses. They talk to her the way men talk when they feel safe, when they feel that the person listening is actually listening. Billy Hatch told her about his mother in Missouri and why he'd come west. A quiet man named Cowboy, whom she'd barely heard speak in 6 weeks, sat at her work table for 20 minutes on the second evening and told her about his daughter in Nebraska, 8 years old, who was learning to read. She listened to all of it. She kept the coffee hot and the bread coming, and she listened, and she thought about the dugout, about the 4 years she'd spent alone, thinking she was outside of human connection, not part of the web of ordinary life that other people lived. And she understood, standing in this kitchen in the middle of a blizzard with 22 men cycling in and out, that she had never been outside of it. She had just not had a door wide enough to let it in. Cole moved through it all with his usual focused competence, out and in and out again, managing the ranch in the emergency. The way he managed everything with a steady, undemonstrative authority that never raised its voice because it didn't need to. But every time he came in, he found her first. Not conspicuously, not in a way the men would notice or remark on. He would come through the kitchen doorway, and his eyes would go to her immediately, and something in him would settle, and then he would go to the coffee and the business of the storm. She noticed that. She noticed it every time, and every time it did something to her that she was beginning to accept as simply part of what she was now, this woman who had a man who looked for her first when he came in from the cold, who had earned the quiet daily faithfulness of being someone's first sight in a room. On the second night, when the wind was at its worst and the house was shaking slightly with the force of it, she was alone in the kitchen for the first time in 30 hours. The men were in the bunkhouse. Dutch had finally been sent to sleep. Cole was doing the last check of the outbuildings. She sat down at the work table. She put her hands flat on the pine surface, the one he'd built still slightly uneven, where the boards joined the flour bin. Beside it, fitted and sealed the pantry shelves, adjusted 6 inches down to a reach that made sense. The kitchen that had been nobody's and was now entirely hers. She was so tired she felt transparent. Her shoulders ached. Her hands were flour raw and heat-roughened. She had been on her feet for most of 2 days, and she was 45 years old, and she stopped. She was 23 years old. She had been so deep in the work that she had forgotten briefly the simple fact of her own age, and the forgetting made her laugh, a quiet, exhausted sound in the empty kitchen. 23. She had lived 4 years in a dugout and married a rancher and managed a blizzard, and she was 23 years old, and she felt at this moment like something ancient and entirely sure of itself. Like her starter culture, patient, alive, fed daily and faithfully kept, waiting for the right conditions to rise. She was still smiling at that when Cole came in. He stopped in the doorway and looked at her sitting at the work table in the empty kitchen, flour in her hair, laughing at something he hadn't heard, and his expression did the thing it sometimes did when he caught her off guard, that brief, unguarded openness that showed her what was underneath the steadiness. "What?" he said. "Nothing," she said. "Come sit down." He came in and sat across from her, his coat still on his face, windburned and tired. She got up and brought him coffee without asking, and sat back down, and they looked at each other across the work table in the quiet of the storm. "2 more hours," he said. "The worst of it will be past by morning." "I know." She could hear it in the wind, a different note beginning slightly higher, slightly less weight behind it. "The cattle are fine. We lost a fence section on the north line, but no animals." He wrapped his hands around the mug. "The men did well." "They did," she said. "Billy Hatch is going to sleep for a week." Cole's mouth moved. "Billy Hatch is 20 years old. He'll be fine by sunrise." He looked at his coffee, back at her. "Clara." "I watched you today," he said. "Both days." She waited. "I've run this ranch for 11 years, he said. "I know what it looks like when someone understands a crisis, and what it looks like when someone just survives one." He paused. "You didn't survive that. You ran it." She held his gaze. "I had the right kitchen." "You had the right instincts," he said, "long before the kitchen." She looked down at her hands on the table. Flour-stained, roughened the hands of a woman who had been working with them since she was old enough to stand at a table. "Tom said the men would be different after the Greer thing," she said. "I think they're different now." "They're different now," Cole confirmed. "And not because you fed them, because they saw how you handled it." He set down the mug. "Calloway told me tonight that his daughter is learning to read. He hasn't told anyone that in 2 years of working for me." Clara felt the warmth move through her. "He told me this evening." "I know," Cole said. "He told me you listened." He looked at her with that steady, full attention she would never entirely get used to. "You gave them something I never did. I kept this place running. You made it somewhere people wanted to be." She felt the truth of it land in her quietly without fanfare. Not a compliment to be deflected, just true. "We do different things," she said. "We do," he agreed. "And together, the thing is whole." She looked at him across the table. Her husband. This deliberate, unglamorous, entirely trustworthy man who had ridden 60 miles to ask a question and meant every word of the answer he'd found. "Cole," she said. "When the storm clears, I want to go back to the dugout." His expression shifted. Not concern, something more careful. "Why?" "To get the starter," she said. I left it. I've been sending Billy with feedings, but I want to bring it here myself. She paused. It belongs here now. Everything does. He looked at her for a long moment, and she watched his face. This face she'd spent months learning to read, and she saw the shift in it, the particular quality of a man receiving something he had hoped for, but had not let himself count on. All right, he said. His voice was slightly rougher than usual. We'll go when the road is clear. She nodded. They sat in the quiet kitchen with the storm moving past them overhead, the range burning low and steady, the smell of bread and coffee and wood smoke, and the particular lived-in quality of a house that had been working hard for 2 days, and Clara felt the completeness of it settle over her like a quilt pulled up in a cold room. They went on Friday morning. The snow was deep and the air was sharp and clear, the way air only gets after a storm has scoured everything clean. The creek road was passable if you knew it, and Cole knew it the way he knew everything about this land by long, patient attention. The dugout looked smaller than she remembered. She stood in front of it for a moment, the low door, the small clay chimney, the hillside that had kept her alive for 4 years, and felt something move through her that was not grief exactly, but was adjacent to it. The particular tenderness of a place that had served you well. Cole stood beside her. He did not say anything. She went inside. It smelled the same. Earth and yeast, and the faint, permanent warmth of the clay oven cold now for the first time since she'd fired it up at 19. The shelves still had a few tins on them. The work table was bare. The cot in the corner was folded up against the wall where she'd left it. The starter crock was on the shelf where it always lived. She crossed to it and picked it up and took the cloth off the top and looked at it. The surface had a healthy film, the pale, slightly translucent skin, of something very much alive that had been patiently doing what living things do in the absence of attention. Still good, she said. I didn't doubt it, Cole said from the doorway. She replaced the cloth and held the crock against her chest and turned around. He was in the doorway, same as the first time, filling the frame, his shadow falling across the earthen floor. But different now. He was not a stranger in her doorway. He was her husband, in a place that used to be her whole life, and was now just the beginning of it. Thank you, she said. For what? For finding me here. He looked at her across the small space. I was looking for whoever made the bread, he said. I know, she said. But you stayed for me. He crossed the dugout in 2 steps and took her face in both his hands, the way he had in the ranch yard the night she'd said yes, careful and certain, and he kissed her there in the cold earth room that had held her loneliness for 4 years. And the kiss was warm and unhurried and entirely without the tentativeness of a beginning. It was the kiss of 2 people who were past the beginning, who had chosen each other through the friction and the adjustment and the blizzard and the ordinary daily accumulation of a shared life, and were still here. When he drew back his forehead against hers, she could feel the steadiness of his breath, and the warmth of his hands, and the crock pressed between them, still alive, still patient, still ready. Come home, he said. She held the crock tighter. I'm already there, she said. Joy. Spring came. The way it came to Kansas slowly. Then, all at once, the flat land going from brown to the particular violent green that only happened in the weeks after a hard winter. Helen Marsh came back in April with her numbers as promised and sat at Clara's kitchen table for 3 hours and negotiated the eastern tributary easement with the focused, unsentimental precision of a woman who knew exactly what her water rights were worth. Clara met her number for number, concession for concession, and when they shook hands at the end of it, the terms were fair in both directions, and both women knew it. Your bread, Helen said before she left. She held up the loaf Clara had wrapped for her. George asked me to tell you it's the best thing he's eaten since his grandmother's table. Tell George he's welcome at Iron Ridge any time, Clara said. Helen looked at her. The evaluation was still there in her eyes, but it had changed character. It was no longer the assessment of a rival or the curiosity of a stranger. It was the particular look of a woman who has recognized a peer. I'll tell him, Helen said. She left, and Clara stood at the kitchen window and watched the buggy move down the road and felt the county settling around her like something that had finally found its right shape. Tom Briggs appeared in the kitchen doorway that afternoon, his usual mid-afternoon appearance, his hat in his hands, his face wearing the expression of a man who has something to say and is going to say it with economy. "Heard the easement settled," he said. "Fair terms both ways," Clara said. He nodded, turned his hat. "Price is going to hear about it. He'll come to check on his daughter's interests." "He's welcome to," Clara said. Tom looked at her. "He's not an easy man." "Tom," she said, "I built a clay oven with my bare hands in a hillside and ran a household through a 2-day blizzard and negotiated water rights with Helen Marsh." She held his gaze. "I think I can manage Robert Price." Tom Briggs looked at her for a long moment. Then he put his hat on. "Yes, ma'am," he said. And the way he said it, the weight in it, the complete and unqualified respect told her that the last thing he'd needed to know about her, he now knew. He left. She turned back to the range. Cole came in at dusk, same as always. Boots on the mat, coat on the hook, the familiar sounds of a man coming home to a place that was waiting for him. She heard him stop in the kitchen doorway. She didn't turn around. She was at the work table with her hands in the dough, the rhythm of it as natural as breathing the starter she'd brought from the dugout, working its patient chemistry in the bowl beside her.